And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Dan Stevens, researcher, past life adventurer, who's also seen his life between lives, which we're going to talk about and more. Dan, thanks for joining me and welcome.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for having me. Been looking forward to this for a while.
Well, Dan, we are happy to have you. And if you don't mind, let's start right from the beginning. And how did you start seeing these past lives and lives between lives in the first place?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I'd always heard of the past life regression concept. And, moderately recently, I had some events happen to me which led to some work around hypnosis for, other kind of non-spiritual things, as you do, if you deal with trauma and things like that. And halfway through that session, some images, visions, beings, whatever you want to call them, just popped out of nowhere, and they were something I'd never heard about or seen or read about, and that led me to sort of say to myself at the point that I'm going to revisit this, at some point further down the line. I'm going to come back to this and start trying to find out what was going on now. So around about 2020, we were in a situation, we had a lot more time on our hands. So I contacted a local person that done past life regressions, and that was that really. So I become more interested in that. And after I did that, I started looking at other people's sessions, which was when things started getting really interesting. Was when I started comparing what I had seen to other things that people like me had seen and spoken about on your session, or sorry, in your videos. And I hadn't seen much of this stuff beforehand. Up to that point, I was quite arrogant, wasn't that really that much into this kind of spiritual stuff. But things changed, and and I started visiting this and trying to get an idea of what's going on the other side, maybe.
Well, let's dig a little deeper into what you saw. For example, who were these beings? What did they look like? What did they share with you?
Yeah, they were 3 orange mantis beings, and they just made themselves visible. And it's as simple as that. They just come to me. The image of these beings wasn't like a memory. This was the bizarre thing. It wasn't so much the image of the beings that I found interesting. It was the definition of those beings. It was the vision was more higher definition than reality. So if I was to look you in the eyes, it was like that plus 4K on top of that. It was very surreal and very strange.
So are you saying that during either a past life or a life between life regression, you weren't looking at memories of these beings? They just kind of entered the hypnosis state and started communicating with you?
Yeah. If anyone's done work for example, PTSD, typically the therapist will take you into a state where you become more and more relaxed and you can revisit these kind of traumatic events. An example this guy used was that you would feel yourself falling deeper and deeper and deeper until you hit the bottom of this kind of like area where there's a path you can go down and sort of revisit these traumatic events that may have happened as a childhood, for example, or in your childhood, for example. So when we got to the bottom of this path, there was various doors or rooms that you could go into, and one of those rooms just had these 3 beings in there that almost popped along to say hello. Very weird, very strange.
Did they communicate with you telepathically?
To be honest, I wasn't there for that. So it was, a stressful period for me. And I saw them, they made themselves showing, and I kind of backed out of there thinking, what was that? So I then carried on with the reasons I was there. The original reasons was I was there, which wasn't this journey. It was other stuff to deal with, stress and whatnot, or the causes of that. So yeah, I was sort of stunned. It was almost like, catching a deer in the headlights is maybe a good example, where I was like, what have I just seen? That's odd. But carry on with the main reason I was there. But I come out of that session thinking this completely blew me away. It was completely unexpected, and yeah, led me to sort of say to myself, yeah, I'll revisit this. And around about that time in my life, I had been getting a lot of sleep paralysis. I had dreams where I was flying, or I could move things around, telekinesis and that type of stuff, which I just thought was normal. Lots of people have sleep paralysis, and you have this whole kind of like, are you being abducted by aliens, and has something happened there? And weird, slightly weird stuff and strange stuff was going on through that period. I think that was 2014, until one day I woke up and went to the toilet in the dark, as you do. Took my phone with me so I could see where I was going, and there was a small chunk of skin cut out of both my toes on opposing feet, like a little triangle. And I have got a lot of background in sport. I do a lot of cycling. And as a cyclist, as we all know, cyclists shave their legs. Sometimes I'd shave down to my toes. I can't remember cutting my toes, but 4:30 in the morning, and I can send you a photograph of these uh, you know, dollops of blood that were fresh on my toes. One on my left foot, one on my right foot, sort of in this place on exactly the same bone on each toe. But again, at that time, I was just like, well, this is just weird. Maybe I've, cut my toes when I was shaving my legs. And then I had more sleep paralysis, and because of what had happened, and sleep paralysis was reoccurring. I remember just kind of waking up and saying, right, stop, that's it, no more. And then it did stop.
Let me stop you for one moment. I want to go back to the mantis first, real quick. How did your therapist respond to the mantis beings?
To be honest, I didn't tell him. Because I was there to deal with other stressful things, and because obviously you're being spoken to while you're in a relaxed kind of hypnotic state, these images are coming into your head, or my head, should I say, but they're personal to you. So something like that it felt very personal, and we're only here for you. Yeah. Uh, and that was that. The image was like, okay, point taken.
Why do you think they visited you? Just to make you aware of them, or
Yeah.
something else?
Yeah. I think it was more an awareness. Just, we're here, and that's it. And yeah, that's a strange situation.
Do you feel like they were benevolent?
No, I would say really neutral, really neutral. It wasn't here to do you harm, wasn't here to do you good. It was just, we're almost like a good example would be that you're in bed in the evening, and your children run into the room silently and just walk out. And you're midway through the night, you're like, that's odd. They've gone back to bed. Strange. And you just, you kind of park these things. And that was a really strange experience, because if someone had said to me at the time, what do you think aliens look like? I would have said shape-shifting lizard people, or grey entities with big eyes. What I wouldn't have said is a 20K definition, small, medium, large mantis being. That would be the last thing. And at the time, I remember seeing that, and I was more freaked out that, one, I'd seen it, and two, that I had no idea that anything like that existed in kind of alternative culture, where people have had these kind of like alien sort of spiritual experiences. So I then obviously done what other people do, went away and Googled like ant people or mantis people, and saw loads of sketches and things of people drawing exactly the same thing. And that really that kind of process is quite a key to my kind of like spiritual journey on this, because before I started doing this, I was working in sales, kind of a, you know, slightly arrogant, salesy, kind of Wolf of Wall Street type, you know, environment. People earning good money, you know, drinking, nights out, that kind of stuff. And I would have said all this kind of thing is crazy and nonsense. But then I started having sleep paralysis and these kind of experiences, and it was like, wow, this is like weird.
Were you able to control your sleep paralysis and go out and fly around
No,
the
it would
astral
always feel
realms?
like a struggle. No, I never really tried. I'd have these like shadowy images of it feels like entities standing over you, or you're struggling to open your eyes and you can barely see through the curtains in your or blinds in your room. But I think if I had them again, I would probably try and I think it was Darius had done a chat with you, and
Mm-hmm.
he said sort of go with it. But I did the opposite. I was kind of like, this is just getting weird. Like, go away, don't come back. And it didn't. It was really strange. And then I think like as sort of you know, you start seeing more awareness of this kind of subject and topic has obviously increased recently quite a lot. And you start seeing what other people are saying, then things become a bit clear. But I got into this more through an interest in psychic spying and remote viewing. So I'd always been aware of that. I think Horizon run a TV show on it on the BBC, I think it was, through the early to late 90s about Ingo Swan's work and all of that stuff with remote viewing. And that had always been an interest with me because that seemed quite legitimate and quite real. And, you know, people can try that and experiment with that and get results out of that. So I'd had an interesting remote viewing, but yeah, then this experience happened and these sleep paralysis events happened, and it was a little bit freaky to say the least, really.
Well, especially if you wake up and you have 2 triangle cuts on your toes.
Yeah. And even now there's, you know, you hear this kind of, this phrase of cognitive dissonance where, you know, even now, like I'm saying that to you now, and there's a kind of refusal to think that would be what it sounds like, right? There must be another explanation for that. It could be something else, but you know, it could be. I could have just cut my toes while I was shaving my legs before a bike race. That was that. But if I did that at, you know, 6:30, 7 o'clock in the evening, I would have noticed that blood pouring out of my toes through the rest of the evening before I went to bed. It's unlikely that I wouldn't have not noticed that. And it's unlikely that I would have cut both in exactly the same place to the same depth.
Well, did you do any subsequent hypnotherapy to see if you could contact those mantis beings again?
Well, I think the first past life session I did was probably late 2020, early 2021. And that's where things started getting quite interesting in terms of how you do those sessions. I think the lady that I dealt with them with had been trained by Dolores Cannon, and she just took me through a really relaxed state, where, you know, you get more and more relaxed, more and more light, and float away on a cloud, and you get to a place that's relevant, and you try and kind of like build up your awareness of where you are. You know, can you feel your feet? Can you see clothes? And it's very similar to remote viewing on that basis. So, you know, like Ingo Swan's process, and I know Daz Smith and people like that will do a meditation, and they'll go to a state where they are given some kind of randomized number, and they'll try to sense whether it's hot, whether it's cold, whether the floor's hard, whether it's soft, you know, and build up this thing. And the past life regression process is similar to that in terms of you float back to a point that's relevant. And in this case, as I tried to sort of look down to see what my feet looked like, I felt myself spin over. And it wasn't like a situation where you would try to, like, you would be maybe trying to make something up. It was as I bent forward, I rolled like a ball bearing, which was totally unexpected. And this is the strange thing with these regression sessions, is if you was making things up when you do a regression, you would see yourself as like a Roman emperor or something like this. If you wouldn't automatically see yourself as like a ball bearing rolling over as you look for your foot. That would probably be the last thing that you see. And I think on that point, I've got a friend who's into kind of paganism and sees herself as a white witch, goes to Stonehenge and all these things. And she went to do a past life regression session with a different therapist to the one I'd seen. And she come back and she didn't like it. She said it was really boring because when she got to her session, she wasn't that white witch, like priestess from another former life. She was a bored housewife in a Victorian home in a sexless marriage with a very affluent husband that was never there. And she rattled around in that house all day, every day, and did nothing. And that isn't what you'd expect someone to fabricate or manufacture those kind of like images and experiences if they saw themselves as a pagan white witch at Stonehenge. And you'd expect there to be some continuity between their perception of their current life and that life. So yeah, I find these past lives really interesting.
Well, maybe that's why she wants to be a pagan witch this life, because the last life was too boring.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, when you were in the life between lives, what did you see? Did you see like the Akashic records? Did you see yourself making a soul contract or anything like that?
Yeah, it's a strange scenario, because I think one thing that I think is always important to discuss when you're talking about this, like life between life and past lives, is that you are infinite. You are me and I am you, and we're part of the same thing. And reality itself, from what I've been shown, seems to be laying on a fabric or a mesh which is created by everyone's collective experiences. And that mesh isn't infinite, although it's nearly infinite. So the scenario is you have to sort of understand that in a near infinite situation, you're seeing these images from regressions of past lives and past experiences, but they're only a snapshot of a vastness as well. And it's quite hard to take those brief snapshots and try and draw a conclusion as to what everything is about. How do you know, if I said to you that there's an infinite amount of time and knowledge that you can access, where do you dip into that? It's like reading maybe a Harry Potter novel. If I said you could read a paragraph, now tell me what the whole series was like and about, it would be impossible to do. And likewise, if I said there's, I don't know how many Star Wars movies and trilogies there are now, I've said, like, watch the opening scene of The Empire Strikes Back, you would tell me that everything's about an Iceland with hairy, monsters that want to kill Jedis. But of course, that's only a very small snippet of that whole, trilogy there. So I think it's interesting. I think we should be cautious as to what conclusions we draw with these regression sessions. And I think it's important to do as many as you can. But when you get to the life between life things, it's such a weird experience. And I think maybe other guests have sort of said the same thing, that you're recalling a memory from someone else's memory bank, but you're recalling it as your own memory, and you're instantly accessing that memory. So if I said to you, what did you do last week? You'll instantly know and feel and be able to appreciate that. It's then quite hard to relay that to other people. For example, if you've got children and your child last week fell over and grazed their knee, you experience the emotions of the child being hurt and the sympathy and everything that goes with that. When you describe that to a friend, you just say, you know, little Johnny fell over and grazed his knees last week. It was a bit of a stressful morning. So what I find interesting with the past lives is the information you get is an experience. And it's quite hard to communicate the experience when it's a non-human experience, or a life between non-human lives, for example, where a lot of things are going on that are difficult to comprehend.
Well, try us. What did you see?
Well, as I went through the lives and different lives, there was a couple on this planet. There was a few. One of those on this planet was an avatar of a human being here, while at the same time the other core entity was in some kind of tube in water, and projecting an image, or in a weird kind of way, projecting their self into this avatar that was playing a role in a World War II setting. Simultaneously, other lives of also, one other life was also in a World War II setting, which raises immediate questions there about the legitimacy of the experience. How can you be in the same place twice, in the same period of twice? And I think what's happening there is you're not necessarily accessing one soul. Your soul, I think, is fragmenting itself into multiples, which is why you can see multiple experiences. And one of the lives I saw was someone that was in a World War II scenario, a young lad. And this session happened when I started becoming more interested in life between lives. So I immediately went into this teenagers, like late teenage years, maybe 18, 19, who was in World War II. The scene I come into was this lad was at a party, didn't really have many friends, didn't really want to be there, and decided he'd kill himself. You know, and obviously I'm looking for life between life information, and that's immediately where I went to. Then the next scene was this guy running into a burning building because he decided that killing himself was a waste, but what he wanted to do is go down trying to save someone else, i.e. sacrifice his life to save, you know, a mother and child from a burning house, which he did. And I saw them run out, and I saw him turn around and walk back into the burning house. And in the next minute, he was dead. And then after that experience, from that point of death, floated off to a place that I was familiar with, but I knew it was a metaphorical image. It wasn't the real image. So I used to do a lot of skiing, and we'd always fly in and out of Geneva Airport. So the image that I received was then I floated off and found myself in a waiting room in Geneva Airport, knowing it was like a metaphorical example. And as I come in, these other guests were departing. These other passengers looked like they were getting on the plane. There was no one there to collect me. There was no one from the other side coming over to do a life review or anything like that. It was just me arriving in this terminal and waiting and waiting and waiting. And bear in mind, I was one of this. I was a person that had decided to exit this life early. So I was waiting and waiting. And eventually these other entities, these other souls started coming back into the room. And as this was happening, the souls and the metaphor of this airport terminal started changing into something that was just a blur. But the important point was that as the souls were coming in, they were like light, sparkly, fiery kind of people. The issue is not the images. The issue is the overwhelming emotional response that I knew all of these people extremely well. We went back a long way, like longer than you could ever imagine. And then more come in, and I think, you know, to put a figure on it, it's probably like eight to 10 of these souls come through. And from there, we almost clustered together into like a ball of light that then vanished off into what was really bizarre, because we disappeared out of that scene into a like a roll of bubble wrap, you know, this thing that you get for packaging, like a fabric of a textured webby situation, and we floated off into what looked like the bubbles were in the bubble wrap, and in each bubble was everything in this universe that you would know, everything in there, and in every bubble was a different universe. Now, I had that experience in about late 21, I think. It was like third, fourth experience I'd had. What surprised me, and the reason I kind of wanted to do this chat with you, is I'd seen, I think it was Darius, which was one of your guests, who had described exactly the same thing. And not only had he described it, it also illustrated it as well. And the illustration of these cauldrons and circular things with universes in is exactly the same as I'd seen. And at the time, I was keeping a lot of this stuff to myself. I wasn't really doing many of these kind of like videos and podcasts. And yet here he is describing exactly the same thing.
I want to go back for a moment to the beginning of this life in between lives. And I thought you said that you saw you or a being in a tube of water.
Yeah.
Which to me represents like maybe who you really are is this being, and you are in some sort of pod and projecting you into a simulated world where you're having these experiences, even more than one experience at the same time. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And that wasn't that life where this young lad had killed himself. There was another life, and that was a really strange experience, because that session, you know, I did the usual thing. You float off into this regressed state. You come kind of round and into a habitat. Where are you? What can you see? What can you feel? What are you wearing? And the first thing that comes to the first feelings I got was like furs and heavily textured like skins and rugs and things like that, you know, like seal skins around my feet. And as I started making sense of where I was, it was snowy, it was cold, and it was kind of Antarctic like weather. And this scenario was kind of an Eskimo, like an Inuit type person, that had some other military type people with them, that was leading them into a cavern, a cave type scenario. And as I started trying to work out what was really going on in that scene, that's when the images of this tube come into the regression, because it was a real biological entity, it was a real biological being, that was almost like, it was weird as it sounds, being remotely controlled from this tube elsewhere. And again, as is the case, as you get through these videos and you start looking at other people's experiences, you see people that have kind of come round while they're in these tubes, and you can see through it. So I've seen that in 2 or 3 sessions, these watery type tubes, like like a container with bubbles, and you can kind of see through it. And as you're looking through it, you can see that you're almost in a laboratory, because it's like opening your eyes. I used to do quite a lot of swimming, and as you're doing tumble turns at the end, as you're swimming backwards off the kick turn in the swimming pool, you can see the lights of the the roof of the swimming pool through the water as you open your eyes. And it's like that. It's like you're looking through the water, but you know you're upright. And the water's all around you, so you can kind of see through it. And these experiences are so weird, because you're receiving this information in the same way that you would be if I said to you, what did you eat for dinner last night? you can remember the tastes, and you know how it felt in your mouth, and you know where you went, and if it's burnt, if it's cooked well, all the other things that go with it. And you just get it instantly.
If we go back to The Empire Strikes Back, at the
Yeah.
end of the movie, after Luke had his hand cut off, he was in a tube of, no, I think it was the beginning when he was frozen. Remember? He was in a
Yeah.
tube of water getting healed, floating around. You remember that?
Yeah. And it's exactly like that.
Fascinating.
You know, you could be really cynical, right? You could
Mhm.
say, well, okay, look, you're fantasistic. You've seen these, you've grown up watching Star Wars, and you
Mhm.
know this stuff, and you could have made that up. And yeah, could be, you know, but the experience is not like that. It's like when you're doing the regressions, you're instantly getting it as if you would, you know, like I've done a lot of sports competitions. So if I cast my mind back to races that I've run, and, you know, where I've gone really hard, really deep, really fatigued, and you can taste the blood in your mouth, that's an ingrained lived experience that you're recalling. And when you go back to that experience, you don't have to drive there, and you don't have to go through the process of getting there. You instantly know it, right? It's a memory. And this is the weird thing that I find with these sessions. It's the amount of information that you just instantly get. And it's so real and familiar. It's not like a dream. You know, you have these dreams where you maybe meet someone that feels like a friend, and you've known them, and you wake up in the morning and you've forgotten about that. It's you recall the memory, you remember it after the session, and you know everything about it as if you've been there.
A significant number of my near-death experiencers wind up in a waiting room on the other side, which I find fascinating with your story. And
Yeah.
I like how, or I think what you're trying to say is that you're there waiting for your soul group, which
Yeah.
many people talk about, or many of my guests. But yeah, again, you're waiting for your soul group to finish up their lives, and then you can all go on to somewhere else.
Absolutely.
And I wonder if that's what even happens during NDEs, is when these people pop into the waiting room, they're just sitting around waiting, and then for some reason they
Yeah.
decide, or someone tells them, you got to go back.
Yeah, and this session was weird because it felt like a long wait, but at the same time it didn't. You know, it felt like a long wait while I was waiting, and then when everyone come back, it felt like it hadn't been a long wait. But the thing that I found really strange about that is where we went as that group, and that was what was important in this session, because we went back to this to basically download the group's experience into what was like a cauldron. You know when you see in the film Aliens, and you've got these like pods in like waiting to hatch out, and, you know, jump in people's faces and stuff. It was like that. But as we went into it, it was, each one was a reality, like a multiverse, and everything that is around us today, you know, other planets and stars and galaxies, was in that. Now, to get the context of the vastness of that, if you imagine like a motorway that's a straight line that goes on, you know, the sort of thing you'd see in Nevada, where you just see a long straight motorway going off into the horizon. Imagine a roll of bubble wrap. I'm assuming that's what it's called in the US as well, with the bubbles in
Yes.
the packaging stuff. Yeah. And you unrolled it to the horizon. That's how far it went. And I assume it went backwards in a similar sort of way. So in another session, we decided to revisit that. And that was very weird, because as we revisited it, we went on and on and on, what I would say was billions of years into the future, to the point that we were standing on the kind of like the event horizon, what you might want to describe it like, almost the edge of the cliff. And the entities that were showing this to me, or providing these images, were getting frustrated, because the therapist who was doing the session with me was saying, well, you know, how far does this go? And they were getting really annoyed, because they were sort of saying, well, come on, like, how much do you want us to build? Like, you're not, we're millions of years into the future. Every one of those small bubbles in that bubble wrap is everything that you know in your reality. And every bubble is a different version of that. And here we are, 200 or 300 miles down the road, you know, and you want us to go on further, like we can only build so much. And that was where things started becoming really interesting, because it seemed like it was almost infinite, but certainly created.
What I love about what you said earlier is that how what we're only seeing, and I'm going to add to what you're saying by adding near-death experiences, is that what we're only getting is glimpses or one paragraph of this billion-year or eternal life story of each of us. So that's why it may be so hard to make sense of it all, because we're only getting paragraphs. And some of them, some NDEs and past life regressions may seem contradictory to others, because again, we don't know where we're taking this paragraph from the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So that session where we went back to that is, after we went so far, we got kind of granular and more forensic on what was going on. So we went down and down and down and into these bubbles to walk around the surface area around the bubbles. And there was an entity there that appeared, and we asked it who it was, and it said it manages all the bubbles. It manages all these experiences. So the obvious question always, you know, what's going on? Are you God? And it laughed. It said, no, it's of course I'm not. And we kind of asked whether it was like a gardener or a caretaker, and it suggested it was something like that. But when we pushed it to try and find out what was really going on here, it said, I'm the same as you. I haven't got a clue. And it's just really strange. This strange, you know, this kind of weird entity was like, well, I'm in the same boat you guys are. I just look after the universes. But I don't know what's going on. And it was like, okay, great. Where do we go from here then? So it was a really weird experiences that, you know, I'd love to sit here and say I kind of know how all this works. I don't. I can only relay the information to people that are maybe watching this show to say, well, look, this is what I've seen. How does that intelligence, I suppose, that I've gathered compared to what you guys have got, and where are we collectively on this? Because, you know, imagine a near infinite billion-page long version of this Harry Potter example I used at the start, and yet we're only individually getting a couple of paragraphs each. So I think it's pretty disingenuous to come back and say, I've got it all out, I've worked it all out, this is where we are. Because as I've gone kind of through the kind of hierarchical structure to get more to a higher level understanding of what's going on, you start seeing two or three key elements are really kind of playing out at its core. And it's just, you know, it kind of the whole thing blows me away. That's such weird experiences.
Well, do you feel that we live in a simulation?
What I've been shown is that there is a simulation. I saw David's chat recently, and I know David is saying 100% a simulation, 100%. We live in a simulation. And he's right. I agree. He's absolutely right. But he's also wrong at the same time, because you've got people like Dolores Cannon saying, well, this is a learning place for the soul. And you coming and you learn things. And if you get it wrong, you come back and you work off karma again. So the response to that from a cynical point of view would be, okay, if we've got free will, the free will would say, I'm going to use my free will to not come back again. It's a little bit like the analogy of the genie in a bottle, and the genie says, you've only got three wishes. What do you want? Well, my first wish would be for another 3 wishes. So the scenario there would be, well, okay, if you've got free will, but you're choosing to come into this karmic cycle, why come back? And what I've been shown is that both are existing simultaneously, and there's a third issue. And that is when you get into the scenario of what's good and what's bad and what's right and what's wrong. And that's when it's important to realize these multiples of these universes, these multiverses kind of exist infinitely. And the university of the soul thing is right, it exists. The problem is it's gone wrong. And it's gone wrong because people have accumulated a lot of toxicity and a lot of negativity there. And they are kind of reincarnating back into this loop of karma. So if you imagine a situation where you come into a university for the soul, you learn experiences, and if you get it wrong, you come back again. But you then introduce something like money, and that corrupts everyone. So the karmic principle is almost impossible to avoid, even if you're a saint, because you're using money. You're earning the money, you're adding value to that, you're moving that value on, you're overpricing it to other people, and the whole system has started to go wrong. And as you go outside of this realm, you start realizing that something quite fundamental has gone wrong with what I was shown was two dimensions colliding into each other and literally causing havoc. And this is going to sound really crazy. As those two dimensions were coming in, one you'd call good, the other you'd call bad. When I was questioning what's good or bad here, they were saying neither. They were just saying they're two completely different dimensions that have collided. This is like a university for the soul. And the weird analogy they used was this is some kind of ET death camp reality, which was shocking. So then I was asking it, well, what do you mean by that? Does that sound really bad? And they were just saying, no, it's not bad. It's just different. So the analogy I saw doesn't necessarily mean it's what it is, but that was the gist of what that was. It was something that we would see as really bad and really toxic. This was like a university for the soul. But the important bit was what happened when it got to here. When it crossed over and got to there, they literally pressed pause. And they cut it, pasted it, duplicated it, and then let it play out. And this is where I think we're at the moment from what I've been showing. The simulation is a construct of what happens when two ships collide in the night. It's almost a little bit like you're in a car crash and you feel yourself losing control of the car and you steer left and then you steer right. Imagine if the autopilot comes on there and then at that point where you're losing control and it lets the whole accident play out. And then once you've learned that experience of that accident playing out, maybe you lose a leg, maybe you lose a loved one, or you learn from all these experiences. Once we've learned, what they show me is that they're then going to press unpause so we can go through the painful part pretty quickly without much pain. And I think that plays into what people are seeing. I think it plays into what David is seeing and saying, that it's a construct. I think it plays into what Dolores Cannon is seeing and saying about previous souls coming here to learn stuff and reincarnating back into it. I think it's consistent with what she's saying about new souls choosing to come into this construct that have not accumulated karma. So you end up with three scenarios. You end up with the scenario where the university of the soul has gone wrong. You end up with the construct, the cut and paste, almost like a backup server. You know, you back up your servers. When we all had servers every week, server goes down and you go to last week's backup, you reboot that, and the new version of the server, you probably install some new software so it can't get hacked again or it doesn't pick up those viruses. And this is where you get into this concept of the new earth, because when the simulation is unpaused and we've all learned from that, we end up in a newer, improved reality, and whatever that is. I think that's the scenario. That's basically what I was showing.
Would you say that is the same thing as what people call the ascension?
It's hard to say. I think this is an issue that we're discussing with universities of the soul, these other dimensions colliding, a simulation being created to play out the pain. But I think the ascension process and the Akashic records are all of it plus more, plus more, plus more, plus more. And I think what's happening is multiples and multiples and multiples of these souls are existing in all of these different realms, in all of these different ways, in all of these different dimensions, and these simulations, and everything is playing out at once. And it feels almost completely random to that decimal point one, where the randomness seems to have been manufactured to be, from my view, it's almost certainly a constructed reality. It's just where you are on the layers within that. You know, you could say that the university of the soul is a construct. You could say the other dimension is a construct. They're bumping into each other. The simulation is a construct of the collision, and that all plays out in a reality. Now, in the one hand, they're all simulations. All of them are a simulation. Yeah. It just depends on what scale you're at and where you are in that traffic. Are you, you know, like if you use ships colliding with each other, are you on this boat or in that boat, or are you in transit between the two? Are you in the life rafts and you're being rescued? There's so much more going on than just these individual experiences. You know, you could have one near-death experience. That isn't everything. And I think that's why we're seeing quite different things from different people.
Why do you think there's such a big interest in these subjects right now?
I think from what I've seen on this scale with these three tiers, this old world and this new world and this simulation bit in the middle, I think we're at the back end of this simulation and we're coming out of it. And I think what's happening is we seem to be coming out of it having gone through the pain. And I know a lot of people feel like they're waking up and they're realizing that, you know, nothing is as we thought it was maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And I think that's right. And I think that is because things are changing. Are they changing for a reason? Is someone controlling that reason? Maybe. Or are we accumulating knowledge now and we're changing that? Excuse me. Are we changing that? Is it the manifestation of the want to live in a different world actually creates that different world itself? And are there other entities that are trying to choke that at the moment, throttle that? And that might be going on. You know, there certainly seems to be, in my past lives, off-planet kind of ET type stuff, where a lot of the images of those off-planet entities are human. They're not lots of aliens running around. A lot of stuff I've seen is human off-planet. And those experiences are human as well.
Well, do you think that there are ETs or some sort of entity that are in control of the planet at this point?
It would look that way. One of the things I've done recently is I've started looking at what other people are saying more. And I think your videos have kind of inspired me to do that, because I've seen them and other people's experiences, and I've seen similar things in their experiences to what I've seen in mine. And at the time, you know, you see these things in these sessions and you ask how you've made it up, you know, if you've made it up, would I have made that up? And you always have to be really objective and say, well, you know, there's always a possibility that I could be insane, could be schizophrenic, making this up, could be completely crazy. But then you see other people seeing the same things and describing the same things that are quite personal to you. You know, you do these sessions and I've never really spoken. I've done other podcasts. I think you're the only person that I've mentioned these sessions to, because obviously this is what you work on, and I've seen other people talking about the same things. And that's when it starts really becoming a bit weird, because when the realization that other people are seeing what you're seeing, frames everything into the context that we obviously can't all be making up these images and these experiences. So something is going on. And I've started reading Dolores Cannon's oldest work. And the reason I've started researching and trying to understand the experiences of her oldest clients, going back to the 80s, is because that's a time where there's no internet. That's a time where not many people are really talking about this subject. And for me, that period is important because it's less contaminated maybe than the period we live in at the moment. You know, if someone was going to make these type of stories up, they could watch YouTube, access the information, and, you know, it's easy to get that information. But Dolores Cannon's really early work and the transcripts of sessions she's done in the 80s are fascinating, because they're seeing these same tubes. There's quite a lot of people that are experiencing being sucked out of the reality they're in, as if they've been taken up at the tube of a vacuum cleaner. There's lots of people saying that the Atlantis scenario isn't what we think it is. It references a period in time that was wholly corrupt, that needed to be erased by the gardeners, by the people that are looking after our garden, our biological, that our meat machines are operating in. It seems to be that we have a garden, gardeners, meat machines, and the souls then appear into those meat machines that we call our human bodies. But all of that seems to be a form of technology. And I know David has touched on this, that just because it's not made of, you know, metal and wires doesn't mean it's not technology. You know, you're made of flesh and blood, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's not a form of technology. So there seems to be someone managing all this and being the guardian of this garden that we live in. What I found interesting with Dolores Cannon's work is some of her earlier work refers to Atlantis as not being Atlantis and being a scenario where the entities that are here, the humans that were here, had free will to take things as far as they wanted to go. And they took things very far and they become very corrupt, to the point that they decided that they might actually be gods themselves and wanted to play around with human DNA, start crossbreeding animals and humans, and do that for the sake of blood sport, because they wanted to see, you know, how they would fight each other. Could they breed the strongest animal to take on your one? And they needed to be wiped out. And this is what's interesting in her sessions. She refers to this period where the creators, what some people might call the gods, said enough is enough. These people need to go. The problem they've got, and they seem to have had in her work, is that they still need to retain the biological technology because they can't afford to get rid of all of it. After which they've rebuilt.
Have you ever seen a UFO or had ET contact in your waking life?
I wouldn't say I have. No. I remember the only experience I've had where I would say that I'd seen a UFO was when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and I was looking at the stars while I was walking my dog with a friend, and the stars looked like the constellations had moved. And you know, it's like when you're you know 8, 9, 10, you're not really aware of where the constellations are. But we were looking at these sort of 10 or 12 stars, and every time we threw the stick for the dog, we'd look back up and they'd be in a different place. And I remember just looking at those, thinking, what's going on? You know, being really objective. It could have been one of the local kids that let off a lot of like silvery balloons, and they were moving around in the sky. But they didn't look like that. They looked really high altitude, looked like they were stars moving around, and that was that. But the weirdest thing for me is when I started getting sleep paralysis. That was a strange period, because it wasn't only sleep paralysis, right? It was dreams that you could fly. I could move things around with my mind, and they felt so vivid. It was yeah.
What's fascinating about what Darius says is that the simulation is coming to an end and we're all going to have a party.
Yeah. And that is, it's those kind of parts and points that I see on your interviews with other people where it really hits a nerve, because you see Darius say that and it's like, wait, what have I just press pause, go back 20 seconds, what have I just heard? And it's like, yeah, he definitely said that. And you go back again, you're like, that's exactly what I've said. It's exactly the same. And it's so weird, because when you have these experiences, they're quite personal in terms of that you just get the information comes in. It's not like, you know, you're trying to fabricate something and pull the information together. It's like the best way to describe it is like the scene in The Matrix where he downloads Kung Fu, but there isn't even a download. You just instantly, it's faster than that. It's like you access it rather than download it. And I think that's where the differential is. And it'd be interesting to see what other people say in the comments, maybe, that is the experience a download, or is it a turning the tap on so you instantly, you just get it. It's not like I'm downloading it, you're recalling it rather than downloading it. And it's so instantaneous.
Well, it's not only recalling it, but a lot of times I would think it's reliving it.
Yeah. And that's a good way of explaining it, because that's, you know, I mentioned earlier, if I said to you, what did you eat for dinner yesterday, or what did you eat for lunch today, you recall it, and you're recalling a lived memory. And this is how that feels. It's very intimate, you know, like the taste of the food in your mouth, you know, the way it went down. Did you like it? Would you have it again? Was it your favorite meal? Was it, you know, your least favorite meal, but you hadn't been shopping and that's all you had in the fridge? Those kind of innate, intimate details are what you get with this stuff. And it feels so familiar. And it also feels very recent as well. It doesn't feel like there's a, you know, a traveling of time there. When we, as an example, when we did this sort of recce around this bubble wrap type landscape, when we went from where we are now to the very end of it, it was like almost instantaneous. But you're aware that you're at the same time, there's a knowing of how vast it is. So there's no delay in traveling there. It's like, just go forward, keep going. You know it's there. You know it's there. But you're not physically moving through it. You're moving through the understanding of what it is. And you got to the end, and I think I've lost my video now.
All right, Dan, you're back. I'm glad you came back. Well, Dan, after watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that?
Yeah, definitely.
What's the best way to reach you?
To contact me is through Twitter. I'm not really that present on, you know, I've not got a YouTube channel. Anything I do, and obviously we spoke via Twitter, or X as it now is, just direct message me through there. You know, I'll post this video on there as well, and reach out to me. I'll be interested to know if other people have experienced the same things that I have.
Do you have anything that you're working on that you want people to know about?
Not yet. I think this is, for me, it's probably heading in a certain direction. I think I feel like it's a journey, maybe. I'm not sure, but yeah, for me, I'm intrigued to see what other people are seeing and saying and experiencing. Because if we're all seeing and experiencing the same thing, it becomes a little bit more like the kind of experiments around DMT, where people are also seeing the same entities and the same shapes and everything there as well. The difference is this is not a chemically induced experience. This is a spiritually induced experience where you're regressing to a former life to see what you can remember. And a lot of us seem to be remembering very similar experiences.
Dan, before we finish up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
I think always trust your intuition. If you've got that little spark of intuition that is telling you to do something, the best thing you can do is listen to it, because I suspect from the work I've done here that you do have someone watching your back, and you know, whether you're here because it's a simulation, or it's an experience to learn from, or it's a changing situation that we've already learned from. If that is telling you something, just go with it. And I think I don't think you'll regret that.
Dan, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.